Welcome to Build Back Better, Virtual Convening Objectives. This is the third video in our three-part series focused on how to take action.
This video is focused on the 4 objectives that are relating to action. This includes ideation and problem solving, personal growth, collective action, and resource transfer. As we look at ideation and problem solving as the next of the convening objectives, we want to recognize this is relatively difficult when it comes to virtual convening, and thus is really only best for groups that are less than 20 people in size. This is a session where people are generating ideas, strategies, and solutions around a specific issue or challenge. These tend to require a lot of diverse perspectives to be able to be successful. You could do larger groups so long as they're being divided into smaller breakout rooms and focus on kind of sub-challenges relating to that. And that way each of the small groups can address one of those sub-challenges separately and then report back. Within these interactions, we definitely recommend pre-work. In fact, likely you've already hosted sessions that were focused on building awareness between this community and building alignment. We also recommend leveraging additional supporting tools like whiteboards or virtual collaboration platforms like Google Documents. Brainstorming can be a lot of fun. It is typically an interaction that brings a lot of energy from a group. And so leveraging a tool like Mural, where you can do virtual post-it notes, is great because you want to make sure that you're capturing everybody's perspective. So being able to give space for people to think about their answers, so you don't just collect what's given to you by the rapid processors in your group, as well as to those giving people a space to write down their answers is extremely helpful so that you're really capturing from everyone and not just those who are speaking often or the most vocally. You'll often also have post-work following these sessions because what's the good of brainstorming unless you're actually going to do something in some sense making with that information. You may once again use De Bono's 6 hats focused on the idea evaluation. You might use World Cafe where people switch between different groups where there's a consistent host in each group where they have a chance to dig in on specific questions. You might pose a wicked question, something that's a bit more potent beyond just a yes or no that give people a chance to think about challenges they're facing. You might also look at doing a discover and action dialogue where folks have a chance to ask clarifying questions and gain the information they need before making a decision, and then brainstorming the variety of actions that folks could take, as well as after looking at those actions, looking at what the potential consequences of those actions could be. Panarchy is another example where you can essentially unleash a lot of different perspectives on one idea. So you would have one person, quote unquote, sitting in the middle of the group. You would have to do this virtually. It's a little more challenging since you can't just put the chair in the middle, but where everybody else is providing that person very specific feedback on the problem that they're facing. Another objective focused on action is personal growth. Now, this is difficult, but with the caveat, it's actually really easy when you have a great facilitator. But it is very difficult if you are tackling this for the first time and are not familiar with building trust and vulnerability and brave spaces among groups. You can do this with extremely large groups of people. It depends on whether or not you're asking them to go on a individualized journey or if you're inviting them to go on a journey together as a small group. For large groups of 100 to 500 people, things like guided meditations, breath workshops, guided visualizations can be done with the entire group from one person sharing. However, if you're really looking for people to interact with each other, then we recommend that they break into small groups of less than 20 people each. The ultimate goal here is that you want your participants to experience growth, evolution, or change on an individual level. It's important to note that oftentimes these personal growth exercises can trigger big emotions. And when these emotions are activated, those small groups create a much stronger sense of intimacy, safety, and a container that's appropriate for brave spaces. You may notice I'm saying brave space instead of safe space. There are a variety of reasons why safe spaces are problematic, depending on your heritage and your background. You may never feel safe in a group of people. However, inviting people into vulnerability and into sharing does take an act of courage or bravery. Some of the other interactions here are, once again, coming back into stories, sharing as pairs. It can be helpful to give your small group a shared set of hand gestures that they might use. This might include twinkle fingers to show that you are in agreement with somebody without having to interrupt them verbally. It can include raising your hand if you want to speak next, or using the kind of fingers of 1 to 5 to show what level of agreement that you're in with someone. Pre and post work is appropriate depending on the larger context of this journey. If this is a one-time session and these people are only coming together once, you may want to lean more on activities like free writing, where you give people a writing prompt. They may even leave the area of the computer and they'll go and walk through that prompt and just write for as long as they can based off of the amount of time you shared. You may also provide music, poetry, or art, or other performance-like expressions that invite people to think about challenges they're facing or opportunities for development in different ways. If you want to do group processing, however, this is where, once again, having a gifted facilitator who is able to both monitor the chat, to be able to do private chat, to check in with folks, where folks are being invited to all share their videos, so there's a sense of shared trust, as well as a container for confidentiality becomes really important. The third, and arguably fairly difficult objective here, is collective action. And it's important to note, when you are bringing a group together for collective action, to not think of this as a one-off session. So we have found at conveners.org that when bringing a group together to build something together, to develop or execute a project together, it generally works best with between 8 and 16 participants, and that you need at least 3 sessions with them to do anything meaningful. We oftentimes recommend that each phase of 3 sessions has an on-off ramp where people can enter or leave depending on if the topic is still relevant to them, but that overall you're looking at bringing people together for about a year. And that's the convening circles framework that we've developed. Within these, you may, during the discover phase, be more focused on introductions, making sure everybody in the room has that awareness of who is there and has alignment with one another, that they're in agreement about what the action is that they're taking. Once you move into building your research agenda and the learning phase, you may want to invite in guest experts who can give presentations. You may invite people to do research on their own and bring that research back to the group. Or depending on your shelter in place orders, people may go on field trips, for example, to go visit specific businesses or to do investigations outside of the specific meeting that you're hosting. Once you're moving into the piloting phase, then you're going to look at pilot design, variable control testing, and getting really clear for the group that about things like IP or ownership. So having really clear group agreements becomes critically important to the success of collective action. And then finally, the last objective is resource transfer. So this is where you're building specific connections to transfer money, time, or talent between participants. This is relatively difficult because people need to have a fairly high degree of trust if they're going to do those resource transfers. And once again, this can work for a larger community of around 100 people, but you're typically going to want to break people into groups of less than 20 participants per group. If your goal is really the facilitation of deals, for example, you're an accelerator program and you're trying to drive investment towards the entrepreneurs within your cohort, or you run a convening that has a group of fellows and you're trying to introduce them effectively to funders or to mentors or advisors. The path of building authentic trust and relationship building is absolutely critical. And that means that ideally you have already run sessions around resource identification and resource alignment or matching before you're doing a session that's specifically about resource transfer. You'll want to make sure that there are clearly structured roles for people within the group. Being crystal clear and aware of the power dynamics that exist, especially when money is at stake, is critical to the success of building a vulnerable and authentic space. You also want to invite people into time box sharing. This is another mechanism for helping to mitigate some of those power dynamics and ensure that everybody has the space to share and everybody has the same amount of time to share. Um, some of the session types, one of our favorites that we've done for many years is the reciprocity circle. Typically, this is done near the end of a convening when there is some of that shared awareness and alignment already in place, and where you are bringing folks together so that each person has a chance to share a challenge that they're facing, and everyone else in the group has the opportunity to share their best thinking. We say best thinking and not just advice, because oftentimes if you've only heard somebody's problem for about 2 minutes, you don't know enough to give them advice. But you might be able to share a potent question that helps them think about it differently, an introduction to somebody who could be game changing for them, or you may actually have other resources to bring to bear to support their challenge. Structured networking can be helpful here as well as ask me anythings. And this can be an opportunity to bring in an expert where other participants have the chance to candidly ask them questions and gain empathy and perspective of that person in their role that they might not otherwise have access to. Next gen pitch is another potential framework. This is essentially an inverted pitch where the funders are the ones who are pitching what their investment framework or criteria look like. And then entrepreneurs get to sign up for office hours or small group conversations with that investor instead of the entrepreneurs being the one doing the pitching and then the investors approaching them. So that brings us to the end of our three-part series on awareness, alignment, and action. Please stay tuned for the next resources in this series to support you on your certified virtual convening training.